All right, welcome back. Thank you for coming. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies, a place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, I'm going to let our special guest, Mr. Robert Jeschonek, I probably butchered that, didn't I?
It's close enough, man. Close enough. Jeschonek,
yeah. All right. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself to people who might not know who you are.
Thanks. And thanks for having me, by the way. I'm really happy to be here as a guest on your podcast. It's very cool.
Well, I know when Terry Mixon started putting a bug up my ear that I should look you up. And then you reached out the same day. I'm like, it's like fates have aligned.
I didn't know that happened that way. Okay.
Yeah, you were on their show, the Dead Robot Society, and I'm like super fan. I listen to that all the time.
Oh, okay. I didn't know he put a bug in your ear. That's very cool. Thanks, Terry.
He's good like that. So
yeah,
can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. I'm a science fiction fantasy mystery author, and I've been at it for quite a while. I've had quite a few things published over the years, including some official Star Trek fiction and Doctor Who fiction. I've also written for DC Comics. I've had Batman comics published by DC and Justice Society. And I've written a bunch of novels as well, including some young adult urban fantasy and some straight up science fiction, some military science fiction. I've written for the Battletech universe, official Battletech fiction, and also my own science fiction that I indie publish. Most recently, the Barbarian saga, which is what this is all about here today.
So the Barbarians was when I saw those covers, I knew I would have invited you even if you hadn't reached out and Terry hadn't said anything, which you'll get to see, dear listener, when we get to that part of the interview. Mm-hmm. But is there any chance this is going to be a graphic novel or comic as well, since you've got experience in those venues?
I would love to do that down the line. That's a great idea. To be honest with you, I haven't thought that far ahead, JR. I'm still
fair enough.
Putting them out. But yeah, the novels have been so much fun to write. And I've got, 2 done and the third's in the works, and I'm planning at least 6. So, but that's a really cool idea. I think it's a perfect fit.
It is. And it hits all the right tropes just on the art alone, that like Conan and all the nostalgia for that. And so the next part would normally be where I tell you, dear listener, how we first found them, but I think I kind of spilled the beans on that one. So there goes my carefully prepared joke about WitSec and a dozen IP routers to hide his identity. And oh, well, maybe next time I'll use that joke. So in the meantime, we're going to jump right to the religion question. This is where we decide if we get to stay. So Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
I got to say, I love them all. Okay, like how many people say that, right? I love them all, but Star Trek was my first and greatest. It was my first, but I do love them all. In fact, I just got done watching and without any spoilers, I just got done watching the finale of The Mandalorian season 2, and I mean, Firefly is just the greatest. So can't go wrong.
Normally, we've been mixing it up and asking a bunch of other properties, but all the ones I would normally ask you wrote in, so I didn't think that was fair. so BattleTech has been on the list before, but so we tried to give ones that I didn't, that I was pretty sure you hadn't written in as a producer of content.
Yeah,
I've never had that problem with another author before where that was an issue, but.
It's fun to write tie-in fiction as well as your own original stuff. I love working in other people's universes and also my own.
So I've actually done that almost exclusively. So I've written in Tim Taylor's Human Legion universe, and then in the Galaxy's Edge universe, I've written my own stuff, and now I'm creating an IP. And you're right. There's something about taking an idea that's already sort of flushed out and then shining lights on the dark corners and pivoting in directions they might not have planned. Like, obviously, you want to be respectful for the original canon.
Yep.
But still to sort of see what, the constraints can do to your creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. I've heard other people say they hate that they hate writing in other people's universe. They both have room, I think, for creativity.
Yeah, I think both can be stimulating in their own way. And boy, Galaxy's Edge, that's a great universe to write in. Very cool, JR. Very cool.
It was a lot of fun. So I wrote, Jason had done an interview where he's eating a hamburger. And he was talking about if you want to be Legion, you got to be thin. So then they approached me to write, and I'm like, I'll show you. I'll write a chubby reservist. and it resonated with the fans. So it was a lot of fun. And there's another book 2 for that's finished and with the publisher in a novella about the Space Marines they have in their universe. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
There is definitely a danger when the IP gets so big. So when I first wrote the book, there were like 6 out. By the time I started writing the second novel and the novella, which all tied in together, there were almost 30. And the more it gets, the more daunting it can be to stay within canon. So I definitely think if you're going to write in someone else's IP, get in early.
Yeah.
So you can help shape it rather than like pick up the pieces 100 years in.
Boy, that's tough when you come into something after like there've been 100,000 books put out, and you have to sort of make sure you don't conflict with any of those.
Now you've had that issue because you've written in some massive properties. Like BattleTech has a lot of lore. I've seen it. Now, when you wrote for them, was that all established yet?
Wow. Yeah, a lot of it. So I had to do a lot of studying up. That's for sure. They sent me some documentation, because they have guidebooks and everything, of course, from the gaming, the gaming history of BattleTech, the BattleTech universe. And I had read some books in the series, of course, and some stories as well, some anthology projects. But yeah, I had to do some real deep research on that, and it's daunting. It is, but it's fun because, like you said, then you can sort of come up with your own twist on it. And as long as it's not too completely whacked out and too far outside the bounds of their creation, you can make it happen, and people remember that. They love that kind of thing.
I will say I went to RavenCon in 2015 when I was writing my very first novel before it was even published.
Yeah.
And that was in Williamsburg that year.
Yeah.
And there was an author there that's written for Star Trek, Star Wars, and Warhammer 40K, among other properties, including his own. And
wow.
he's told me that of every property he's ever looked at writing and has written, the Warhammer fans are the worst because they get the most fanatical about, like, no, that ballistic was a half a degree off, and so it would have done like they go like they're hardcore about it. And because like it's a tabletop war game the way it is, like they've got the math down, like they know that. Like no. It travels X feet per second. It would hit this ballistic arc. Like, they've got that stuff to a side. I don't know that I would be brave enough to try that IP, but most others I'd probably try just for the fun of it.
Yeah. Well, that would take some dedication there, I'll tell you, or a vast reservoir of existing knowledge, I think, and love for the property.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found. The trick is you really have to like the universe you're writing in. So like the way I got the first contracts, for instance, with Tim Taylor, I was just a fan reading his books, and I would send him all these notes. What about this? You left this hanging. Like, you should tell me these stories. And finally, I guess he had enough, and he's like, JR, you write the dang thing and leave me alone. And I got a contract out of it. But don't harass people. It's probably not the best way to start a business if you're listening, dear leader. But
it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work. Sometimes you get restraining orders and court but yeah, I definitely think loving the property you're writing in is huge. So,
and it's nothing quite so good. I mean, like making your own original thing, afresh out of the ether, right, is incredible as well. But there's almost nothing that's quite as wonderful as getting to write for something that you've loved all your life, or at least for a very long time, and then you get to be a part of it, finally, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's definitely like a dream come true when you get those moments.
Yeah.
So because we're polytheistic, we can't let you get out without one more of the religion questions. So,
okay, great.
Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, or the Percy Jackson series?
Well, that one's less of a challenge for me to comment on. I have to say Lord of the Rings for sure. Tolkien, absolutely.
Have you read the other ones?
He's the man. I've read some Narnia. I have not read any Percy Jackson. I'm familiar with the series. I know the basic gist of it, and I've seen a little on the screen. And I'm sure it's great, but I know Tolkien, and I mean, he's just one of the most incredible influences on my work and on the genre and on filmmaking and everything else. So yeah, I love it.
So because we love both the fantastical and the scientific, Blasters and Blades, what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Sci-fi, absolutely.
Do you remember what the first property that caught you was?
Yeah, it's I'm going to sound repetitive here, but yeah, Star Trek is what did it. But interestingly, it was Star Trek fiction, Star Trek the written word rather than the TV show, because I'm a little older, so like back when I was growing up, we didn't have these fancy things that would record and play back a video, like a video recorder or DVR or any of them fancy things. All we had was the TV and like 3 channels. and You couldn't watch Star Trek just whenever you felt like it. And when I was a kid, Star Trek had already come and gone in terms of its original broadcast. It was in syndication, but I didn't always get to see it for various reasons. So anyway, I fell in love with the novelizations first, and that's what grabbed me. I love the characters, Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scott, all of them, and that's what grabbed me. And then I expanded out from there. So I mean, it was like the key to the door that that opened wide into the vast universe of sci-fi and Asimov and Heinlein and
You're
everybody.
definitely selling it with the card catalog behind you.
Right.
I remember that. I don't think kids learn the Dewey Decimal System anymore. That was the bane of my elementary school, having to learn how to use that thing.
Oh man, so, it's crazy. It's a real mystery. But it's back then. I know it's hard to believe for people growing up now, but we had none of that. It's like you took what you got. If Star Trek was on at 4:00 and you weren't there at 4:00, you didn't get to see it.
Yep. So what is it about speculative fiction as a genre, so sci-fi, fantasy, all of that umbrella stuff? What is it about that you love?
I love the possibilities, right? Of that kind of fiction, the possibilities for the future and for humanity. So when you say speculative fiction, spec fic, I mean, I'm encompassing not just sci-fi, but also fantasy and all the little subgenres that come with both. And I love the possibilities that are suggested by those different genres and subgenres, because it tells us that we can be more than we are. We can do better than we have if we can just imagine it, And I know this might sound a little hackneyed, but it's true. That's what I love the most. That we can think, that we can imagine, that we can dare to do better, right? Because man, if this is it, if this is all the better we're going to do, it's kind of crappy. I mean, it's so much more. There's so many more possibilities. And that's what I love. I mean, and at the heart of it. And plus I love blasters and blades and stuff. I mean, pew pew and swish and slash and the excitement.
The best parts of it is you can also I don't tend to like message fiction. If I want to be preached at, I'd be at a church.
Right.
But that's not to say you can't have deeper themes and messages in fiction. It's just you can't be heavy-handed with it. Like you have to be fair to the belief in the moment of the story, right? Yes. And that's the case. You can explore a lot of ideas that are ahead of their time even. I mean, the Timeline was the first one, I think, to write a Filipino character or write an Asian American protagonist.
Yeah.
When he wrote the Starship Troopers, was it back in the 60s, I think?
Oh, yeah. That was a long time ago. What a prescient book.
Star Trek did it with the half blackface, half whiteface aliens when they were talking about discrimination and how ridiculous it is. I mean, there's lots of historic properties before everyone decided to wear their politics on the sleeves that could address deeper issues and just think about them in ways that were both, enlightening, but without being in your face. So you feel like you got your back against a wall. So you could just think about them rationally and use that logic part of your brain instead of engaging raw emotion. Whenever you back anyone into a corner and you tell them they're wrong or they're bad, predictable results. But when you can talk things out and be cold, calm, and rational, it's amazing what you can do. And you can do that through fiction in ways that you can't in sci-fi and fantasy and the detached from modernity of fiction in ways you couldn't, say, with a political thriller.
Yep. Oh, JR, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. It's got to be buried a layer or two or three under the surface. And it's got to be secondary to the excitement and the story, right? The plot and all of that, of course, is tertiary to the character development, right? That's got to be forced front and center, not forced. First and foremost, front and center, characterization and setting, and then the story and the excitement and the action, and then under that, right? But it still has to be there enough that you can get the point across without clubbing somebody over the head.
Yeah, and I think most of it we do probably subconsciously, both as readers and writers, because nobody goes around. Well, most people don't go around thinking about those things on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. So it's just sort of one of the ways authors show who they are through their writing, I think. But the fact that you can do that, I think, is what makes it great. So,
absolutely,
how'd your love of speculative fiction transition into you writing stories in that field?
Well, I have always loved to write. Okay, I mean, I know people say that all the time, but it's true. Ever since I was a little tiny kid, I love to write, and I have the old mimeographed handwritten little magazines to prove it. I made when I was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, maybe younger than that. And so I would write my own stories. And back then it was more of a mix. You know, I wasn't 100% into science fiction. I guess I was into comic books maybe before sci-fi. And so, you know, I'd write stories about comic book characters and then TV shows that I loved to sort of tie in, like fanfic. It was fanfic, man. So that's really what led me into that direction. So anyway, all my life I've loved to write, and I sort of got away from trying to do it in not a professional way, but a higher level way until later, right? Maybe in my 20s, 30s, I started to really start to push it and to try to rise above the basic level that I had attained. And I found out about a little contest. It was called Strange New Worlds. And it was a Star Trek fiction writing contest sponsored by Pocket Books. Back then it was Pocket Books. Now I think it's a gallery. And I wrote a story, sent it in. It was called Whatever You Do, Don't Read This Story. And it was a tie-in story, but it broke a lot of rules. And it placed in the contest. And then that really set me down the path, I have to say. That's what just fired me up. And ever since then, I've been writing like a madman.
Okay. So when you talked about you did comic books, now, are you also an artist? Like, do you draw? Or is it just, you know, sketches and then at some point in time you'd like... So
yeah.
The comics you didn't draw when you produce them?
No, I don't do that. No, but yeah, thumbnails or whatever to try to get the point across if I'm trying to convey a layout. But typically I generate them, you know, in script form and then send the script off to an artist. And yeah, just like doing a screenplay or a play or whatever. And it's a whole different animal, and it's a lot of fun, you know, trying to bring in that visual component and trying to picture it as if you're, you know, making a movie or whatever, and trying to envision what the angles are going to look like and how the juxtaposition of elements is going to work. It's great. I love it.
It's always amazing when you get artists of various mediums together in one room. Everyone's always sort of impressed with the other person's art. Like, man, you could draw a picture. I wish I could draw. I draw stick figures. And they never sort of realize they're all doing like various forms of art. Like, oh, I just paint a picture with words. But man, you're actually creating art you hang on a wall. And they sort of, I've noticed they all have that reaction about the other style of art. So it always amazes me when you meet people that can do sort of more than one. Like, we've interviewed some authors that actually drew comics back in the day.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Published ones. And it's just, I wish I had that level of skill. I never made it past stick figures.
Oh, it's a whole other discipline. And it's so wonderful when you find someone who's really accomplished in that field and is also responsive to your suggestions and can bring your work to life on the page. It's really a wonderful thing.
So many authors let their own real life experiences sort of influences the story they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments for you that shaped you as a storyteller?
Wow, that is a great question. I mean, as you said, any creator is sort of the sum total of all their experience, like sort of pulled together into one and channeled into their work. I've had a lot of experiences growing up, I think that fed my writing and the things I write about and how I write about them. For example, being bullied at a young age was not a wonderful experience for me, and so I tend to write about that in different ways in my work. I tend to write about what it's like to be the underdog. I tend to see things from the underdog's point of view, and to try to write about the fact that might does not always make right, and sometimes other solutions are the best for all parties involved, even though it might not always seem like it, though might has its place, and you need to stand up to the bullies of the world and of the universe. But yeah, I guess that's something that has informed my work. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's transition from the writing side a little bit and letting the audience get to know you. Let's talk about more from the fan angle. So has anyone ever asked for your autograph out in public away from, book signing or conventions?
Yeah, JR, I write a lot of different genres, and one of them that I've had a lot of success with is local nonfiction and fiction. So what I mean by local is I live in a place called Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's a small town. It's about 2 hours east of Pittsburgh. And we have had a rich history in many ways. Steve Ditko, the famous comic book writer and artist, is from our town, actually.
Okay.
If you've heard of Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or any of those characters. Anyway, I've sort of done really well writing books about local history, in particular local department stores that are now gone in the mists of history. And they've done really well because a lot of people just love these stores. And so anyway, I've gotten a lot of people come up to me on the street here in my town where I still live and ask for my autograph. They'll bring a book, or they'll just bring a piece of paper up and say, hey, could you sign this? And it's always a really cool experience when people just ask you spontaneously for that, because you're not expecting it. I don't go waltzing around thinking I'm, Mr. Great Writer and people are just dying for my signature. But yeah, sometimes they'll ask me, and I always love it. And I always keep in mind that they are what matters the most in any creative equation. The reader's what it's all about.
Absolutely. So have you ever spotted anyone out in the wilds reading your books?
Yes, I have. And again, the local fiction and nonfiction stuff, the books about these local department stores and shopping centers, I'll see people reading them in doctors' offices or in line at a bank or in the park or whatever. I've seen them around, and it's very cool. It's a great feeling.
Okay. So finally, what is the weirdest or funniest interaction you've had with a fan since you started writing? And obviously this is a family-friendly show.
Well, see, right there, you're forcing me to move a lot of stories off the table there, JR. I had some really good ones in mind, but I'm gonna have to deny your listeners that experience. But yeah, there's kind of a funny story. Again, it has to do with the local work. I had a book. It was called Long Live Glossers, and it's about the Glosser Brothers department store in my hometown. And at the time, I was working a day job, right, in a building in downtown Johnstown. And at lunchtime, if someone would contact me and say, hey, I'd like to buy some of your books, I'd go down to the parking garage. I'd get some books out of my car, and I would pass them over, and they would pay me for the books, right? And I didn't want to be too obvious about this. I didn't want it to, I didn't want to put it in my boss's face. Not that there was anything wrong with what I was doing, but better to sort of keep that on the QT, as we say. So anyway, I was doing this over a long period of time. I would hand these books off, and people would give me money, and sometimes I'd sign them for them right there, and it was a really cool thing. Anyway, eventually our company decided to move out of that building and move somewhere else. And in the process, I was talking to the people who managed the building, and they said to me, there's something we've been meaning to ask you, Bob. We kept seeing you making these deals on the security camera in the parking garage, and all this time we thought you were we wondered what you were what were you selling there out of your car? And I said, oh, it's books, my Glosser Brothers books. They said, we thought you were dealing drugs, man. We were going to turn you in. I'm like, no.
That could have gotten you more press than your books might have sold.
Yeah, that would have been a really interesting story.
Right? And then you could write about that too. But, you're too pretty for jail. So
yeah. Oh, thank you.
So this is where we talk about everything you've written. So can you give us the Reader's Digest version of your body of work?
Wow. There've been a lot of things. I've written Star Trek fiction, so you can still seek that out. I know you can get it electronically. I've written some short stories and also a novella. I was one of the few writers to write a story for Peter David's New Frontier universe, which was really a cool experience. And I've written some Doctor Who fiction. You can find all this on my Wikipedia page. I've got all this stuff. Someone was kind enough to go in there and list all this, so it's a really handy reference tool. In addition to that stuff, I've written comic books, and I've written tons of short stories that have been published by magazines, Spec Fic in particular, science fiction, fantasy magazines, and websites. I write short stories that are published every month by a magazine called Pulp House Fiction Magazine. I don't know if you've heard of that one. But
I have.
It's published by Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, WMG Publishing. It comes out every month, and it's a really cool fantasy magazine. I'm sorry, fiction magazine. They have science fiction, fantasy, crime stories, regular literary fiction, but it's always twisty and oddball and offbeat, and I love writing that kind of stuff. And they've been publishing a story of mine in each issue so far for the lifetime of the new iteration of the magazine, which is a couple of years old now. They had an earlier version as well. So readers can find my stories there. They can find them in a magazine called Galaxy's Edge, not to be confused with the Galaxy's Edge series. And also my fiction, my original fiction, which I publish myself, comes out through my publishing company, which is called Pie Press Publishing. The specific imprint is Blast Off Books. And you can find my collections of fiction, including Blast Off, and In a Green Dress, Surrounded by Exploding Clowns. That's a collection of my fiction. You can find I have a series called the Battle Knot science fiction series, which is very cool. Your listeners might be into that one. It's sort of like Battletech, but not quite. It's very much military science fiction, a little bit less of the battlesuit armor stuff and a little bit more military fiction, Space Marine stuff. And I'm working on a series also, which is sort of a takeoff on Star Trek. And there's a novel out there called Sticks and Stones, which is also published by Blast Off Books, Pie Press. You can also find my audiobook fiction on audible.com and Apple iTunes, or whatever that's called now, Apple Music, and Amazon. You just go and search for my name and you'll find loads and loads of stuff.
I will link to the I'll link to the Wikipedia in the show notes. I just added that real quick.
Okay.
Okay, so I got to ask real quick.
Yeah.
Why Pie Press? Are you like a huge pie person? Like you like apple pie, pecan pie, something like that? Or
I don't know. I thought it sounded cool at the time. Pie Press Publishing. And I don't know. I just thought it was sort of a play on words, because there is a thing called a pie press. And, and I thought people might wonder, well, is this pi as in the mathematical concept pi, or is this pi as in the pie you eat? And it seems like it would be more natural to expect pi as in the concept than the food. But anyway, that's sort of the origin of that. And Blast Off, of course, that's obvious.
Well, because I'm on a diet and it's working, but because of that, now I can food all the time. So, you said pie, and I'm like, apple pie sounds good. But it would be cool if you'd be like, yeah, I totally love apple pies. That's why I'm here. So while all of that sounds fascinating, and the link, like I said, will be linked in the show notes, dear listeners, so you can check it all out. And we'll be pulling out Chris and Catherine Rush's episode from the archives. We interviewed her when we were still the Sci-Fi Shenanigans. She's a nice lady.
Yeah.
While all those sounds fascinating, today we are here to talk about Horde's Challenge, which is the first book in the Barbarian saga. So where did you get the premise for this universe? Was it psychedelics, Ouija board, overindulging in those expired pies?
I was lying in the New Mexico desert one night, staring up at the starry sky, and a beam struck me from above, from a glittering light. And no, I don't. It just sort of came to me. I was trying to think of a cool idea for a science fiction series, and I don't know, these ideas just sort of merged together in my mind. Conan the Barbarian meets Star Wars. And I thought, that's something I haven't seen recently, though there have been other series, other books and stories in that same subgenre, right? Barbarian sci-fi. But I thought, that's something I haven't seen for a while. And I would really love to write something in that direction, in that vein. And so I started just thinking about it and also thinking about, our modern world and where we are headed, maybe, if you wanted to go in a cynical direction. And so this book sort of posits what would happen if we keep going down that darker path and things sort of come apart, like our veneer of civilization falls away and we're transformed back into a barbaric society, right? And so that's sort of the premise. That's sort of where it came from.
I think the only other person I've seen recently do Conan meets sci-fi was Nick Cole did a novella in his, I think it was the Red Rocket Press anthology, I think was the name, something weird like that. If you look up Nick Cole's bibliography over on Amazon, you'll find it. But he had Conan where Conan was actually a cyborg. So, and that was, he's a warbot that went a little loopy, which explained all the behaviors, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been pestering him to go back to that and write a series, but he keeps talking about bills needing to be paid, and it's funny how that need to eat, as we keep coming back to, affects our decisions as artists.
Oh, it sure does. It sure does. Sometimes in a great way. I mean, that helps to spur you onward.
It does. It does. It, when you're hungry, you're sometimes at your best.
Yeah.
Hungry meaning thirsty for the income.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the first 2 books in the series are actually currently in a Kickstarter. I have it scroll on the bottom of the screen, dear listeners. If you search Kickstarter for Barbarian Saga, you'll find it. We don't normally talk about craft on the show. This is very audience, reader, consumer focused.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
you've decided to take this through the Kickstarter route, which is instead of just publishing the quote normal indie way. So what made you decide to go that route?
Why not, man? I think it's a great way to go if you can afford to do it that way. And by that I mean, if, as you say, you're not starving, right? You're not super hungry and you got to get that work out there. Like if your immediate funding is not reliant on that book paying off as much as possible in the immediate moment, then why not? Why not put it out first? I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I think it fits well into a standard indie publishing plan. Again, if you can sort of time it right, okay? Why not take advantage of some of these opportunities? Why not put it out there as a Kickstarter and get some money that way, right? And also have the readers help you to fund your artwork, some of the development work that went into that book, and also help them, have them help you to fund the paperback and the hardcover editions. I think it's a natural fit. You put that in right near the beginning after you finish the book or books, and then, you get that done, you move it aside, and then once you've sent out all the rewards, once you've fulfilled all the rewards for the Kickstarter, made all your backers really happy, because that's what it's all about as well. And that's one of the big fun pieces of Kickstarters or crowdfunding in general. Once you've done that, then get it out there, send it straight to KU, start the money machine working there. I think it's a really good fit. I don't think everybody's doing it that way. Some are, but not everybody.
I think Yukav Markin, I'm probably butchering his name, and if he's listening, I apologize. He's one of the other veterans we've interviewed. He's an Israeli army veteran. Okay. We've interviewed him before, but I know he does his that way as well.
Yeah.
But
I think why not? Unless you can't afford it, unless you can't wait, right? Unless it's like your schedule is set up so tight and your money schedule is so tight, your budget has got to be met. I got to get it in KU now, man. Like everything's got to go through right away.
It's pretty obvious what it does for you. It allows you to potentially fund better art than what you could afford because you're going to have the backers. But what does somebody that's backing you on a Kickstarter, aside from supporting the artists they love to keep them in business, which has value, like the patronage model of the Greeks and the Romans, what do they get? So why should they buy? And we're speaking specifically about this project. Why should they go to the Kickstarter and back it that way rather than waiting for it to be on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever? What do they get different?
Well, there are things you can only get through the Kickstarter. There are specifically goodies, like, and I'm going to run through some of these here first. You can get a sticker set. You can get special button set, right? Pins that you can put on your shirt or your hat or whatever. You can get air fresheners with that great Tom Edwards artwork. You can get just cool things that, you could not get otherwise, and things that really it's not in the author's benefit to do when the book is for sale on Amazon, right? So it's just cool things that only come with the crowdfunding thing. And the coolest thing of all, I think, right, personally, is you can get a cameo role in one of the books. And I always come back to this, right, because it excites me the most. I think back to young Bob when I was first starting out and reading, science fiction voraciously, by the way. I couldn't get enough of it. And I was so excited. And I can only imagine, this was not a possibility back then, or if it wasn't a possibility for me. I'm sure if you were a very good friend of an author, you could make this happen. But I couldn't get a role in my favorite author's book back then in the 70s or 80s or 90s, right? And now you can through my Kickstarter or other Kickstarters. That's a pretty common thing. They call it Tuckerization, right? That's the term for it. But if you back the Kickstarter at a certain level, then I will add you to a book, not just like listing you in the back of the book in an honor roll, right, or a Hall of Fame for backing, for supporting the project, but also for being, just a backer at that level. I'll get you in there. And sometimes it can be really fun. I have a friend of mine, Michael W. Lucas, who has backed other projects of mine, and he likes to have himself killed off in books. We killed him off in my last Kickstarter, which was for an anthology called Space 1975. And that's a lot of fun too. I mean, it's kind of something unique to do. So there are a lot of different ways. Like if somebody wanted to back the project and they said, I really want to be killed off in a unique way, I mean, I would do that for them. But I just love that. Those cameo rules are really what get me the most. I'm like, what would I love most as a kid or a reader, an earlier reader? And I just love that. So that's something you can get with this Kickstarter plan if you back it at the $80 or more level.
And so if you're listening and your kids are new readers and you think they'd like this, you could pay and have them killed off, which, every parent has had those frustrating moments. And then the kids think you did something nice for them. So win-win.
I can say, I mean, these books, there's some violence, right? I'm not going to lie, but they're not, I don't know if I'd say they're R-rated. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say that. So it would work.
So does this allow you, and I'm just thinking real quick with the business hat, audiobooks are hit or miss. It's about, $100 to $200 per finished hour for production cost. Maybe you make your money back, maybe you don't.
Yeah.
You got to trust the companies in the back end to be honest with their reporting. Is as much as I can say. I don't want to piss the overlords off. But this sounds like it would give you a way to potentially fund an audiobook as well. So is that one of your Kickstarter benefits?
Not this time, because it's such a big piece and I wanted to save that, right? So that's something I would want to do in the future as a future Kickstarter, but we're not doing that this time around. I just wanted to keep this one just for the paperback and the hardback editions and to get those complete, and then also to expand them if possible. Some of our stretch goals are for me to expand those two books by a couple thousand words. So I wanted to do that first.
And so there's a danger, I guess, of being too scattered.
I think it helps if you focus in your fundraiser, right? Your campaign. I think it helps if you're very clear. You're like, this is what I want to do, and here's why I need you, the backer, and here's what you get if you help me out with this project, and it will be worth your while. And so that's kind of how you have to approach it. I think you got to watch. You're right. You don't want to be too much like, here's this and that and this and that. And, I know in the past when I've tried building campaigns, I might have gone more down that road and found that it wasn't the best approach.
So the way to get him to do the audiobook sooner is to max out whatever he's got listed now, dear listener, and then he'll have no choice but to add it because he's got nothing left. That's how you do it. So just throw all your money at him. Just back your truck full of cash up and just dump it in. All right. So we've hinted about this art. So before we dig in and talk about the book itself, we're going to pull up this sexy, sexy cover and get us off the screen. Woo! So what can you tell us about this piece of art? Because it is glorious. I mean, this would make me buy it for no other reason.
Thank you. Yeah. It's by a guy named Tom Edwards. Perhaps you've heard of him.
I have. He's most known for his spaceships and spaceship ass.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's definitely well known in the field. He has done some amazing work over the years for lots of different authors. And I met him at 20 Books to 50K in Vegas a couple of years ago. And I talked to him at length, and he got real excited about this project because it wasn't like his typical project. It was more with human figures as the center, as the key of the artwork. And then also this very unique ship, which plays such a crucial role in the book. And he loved the idea of bringing it to life. And so we had a lot of conversations, and that's what we did. He developed this ship and brought it to life and brought the characters to life. And he just really did an incredible job.
So that's giving me some real Castle Grayskull vibes going on.
Ah, no, we can't talk about that. It's so controversial.
No. It's totally not Grayskull. Totally just, whatever. No, but I definitely like it. The art was what drew me in. So if I had seen nothing but that, I probably would have thrown money your way. So
thank you. I'm real happy with it. I really am. And he's done 6 covers for me, though I'm not putting them all out there yet. And they're at least as good as, if not better than that. He did a really wonderful job.
You have the second book in the Kickstarter as well. We're going to talk about the first one because we want this episode to be evergreen.
Yeah, man.
And people can still listen to this even after the book is published and finalized a year from now. But if you're listening to it as it goes live, you should definitely check out the Kickstarter for no other reason to see the second book cover, which we're going to make you go there to see. And that link will be in the show notes. But let's move on now to the story itself.
Yeah.
So what would your 30-second elevator pitch for this novel be?
Okay, a 30-second elevator pitch. And go. In a post-apocalyptic future, a devastated Earth is in search of salvation in a time when mankind has devolved into a barbarian society. High tech remains and is in hiding, but they have to the purveyors of the high technology weaponry of the future come out of hiding, and they enlist these barbarians, these hordes of Earth, to help stave off this terrible threat, which is conquering the galaxy and coming ever closer to humanity, to Earth, and to wiping out humanity once and for all.
Sign me up. So
Great.
What makes your series special?
I think the unique combination of high-powered barbarian action, for one thing, combined with ultra high-tech sci-fi trappings, combined with a beautiful vision of the universe and some really unique characters.
So when you got really excited about that for a second, I just keep wondering, how much does someone have to pay you for you to come and read this to them in that voice?
We could work something out, I'm sure. Yeah.
You can be bought, is what you're saying, for the right amount of money.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to do that, in fact.
Okay, and so which science fiction or fantasy trope, because you're borrowing from both sort of fields, do you feel like Horde's challenge fits the best, or hits the best, I should say?
Well, definitely barbarian fiction and space opera. It's a combination of the two. And there's also sort of a sous-son of military sci-fi, mil SF.
Okay.
Because these barbarian characters are enlisted by these high-tech guys who've been hanging out sort of in the background, sort of watching to see what's going on. The high-tech guys don't have the ability to commit violent acts anymore, so they enlist the barbarians, they bring them up on a ship, and then they're sort of forced into sort of a military hierarchy, which goes over about as well as you would expect.
Okay, so now let's talk about the story itself. Since you sort of combined the tropes and the subgenres together, we'll just accept both and move on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your main character? What makes him or her, I'm going to guess it's a him by the cover, but I don't want to assume, but what makes them unique in the crowded field of science fiction and fantasy?
Well, there are two main characters, Torque Galgor and Angar Crux, and they are both rival horde lords, right? Each one has their own horde, their own barbarian horde on the surface of Earth. And what makes them unique is that they are tightly connected, and yet they despise each other in every way, and they're working both together and against each other at all times. So I think it's kind of a unique way that I've put them together in this particular book, that they're sort of put into a situation where they have the opportunity to gain power that they could never have imagined on Earth in their barbarian world, and they have to figure out what to do with it, and they both sort of help each other in certain ways, but then they are constantly at odds, and they're always looking to destroy the other. So I think it's unique in that way.
It would help if I unmuted. What a boomer thing to do. All right.
That's okay. It's a nice dramatic pause. I like that.
yeah, that's what it's totally dramatic pause.
Totally.
So were there any secondary characters that were memorable to you? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, there's a crew on this ship, and they're all members of this group called the Blacksmiths, right? They're the high tech guys who've been sort of hanging back and waiting, and they recruit the horde lords to go out and help them fight off this terrible menace. And the members of that crew, I think, are pretty interesting. In particular, the captain of the ship. The ship is called the Halcyon. That's the one that's pictured on the cover there, with the skull and the horns and everything, made to look really fearsome. And the captain of the ship is Captain Gage, and he's really unique. He's a really snarky character, a real smart aleck, but very competent, and also world weary, and really desperate for help. He knows that humanity's at the end of their rope, and so he'll do just about anything and say just about anything as well. Speaking of saying just about anything, there's another character who's another member of this crew, and his name is Punji Imbroglio. And he's a member of a plant-like species, an alien species, and they are one of the many alien species who have been really beaten to hell by these bad guys out there in space, and they're turning to the Barbarian guys for their help, as well as the human blacksmiths. And Punji is like a real over-the-top, crazy character, and he has the ability to distend his body and do kind of crazy things. He's a ferocious warrior, even though sometimes he seems like comic relief. And he's maybe my favorite character, other than the two lead Barbarian guys.
Okay, so what about bad guys that they have to face? So do they have any that you can tell us about without spoiling?
Yeah, there's an alien menace called the Call, spelled C-A-U-L, the Call. And they are gradually working their way through the galaxy and just wiping out one species after another and enslaving the remnants and putting them to work for themselves. Not really in a Borg-like way necessarily. It's more like a domination kind of way, without any free will, but without the sort of cyborg kind of implant stuff. And anyway, they're just pushing their way through the galaxy, and they're gradually coming closer and closer to Earth, and they seem to be undefeatable. And but of course, the main bad guys in the book are Torque and Angar, the two barbarians. They're also the main heroes, but they don't always act in a heroic way. They're always working against each other, and they're always trying to see if they can take over the whole shebang themselves. That's their key interest, is to dominate everything themselves. So yeah, they're the bad guys as well as the good guys.
So speaking of characters, you did a lot of evil things, it sounds like, to yours. So if they ever met you in a back alley, how do you see that interaction playing out?
Oh, I would last maybe 10 seconds, especially if they knew who I was and what I had done. No, actually, if they knew who I was and what I had done, the opportunities I had presented them in their story, then they might be happy and take me out for a nice, cold draft of some sort of mead or something before they killed me.
Okay. So, fair enough. All right. So this would be where we let you give us a chance to sneak peek of how the sausage was made. So were there any cool scenes or ideas that you had to cut from the final book that you thought would be cool to use someday?
Well, that's a great question. I really put just about everything in that I had at the time, everything that I was in love with at the time, I put into those two books. Though as time has passed, I've thought of other cool things that I would like to do with the characters in the context of those first two stories, right? Those first two adventures. So I don't want to give too much away, right? Because that's where the meat of the expanded books would come in. And if I meet the stretch goals, then I will bring this into these books. But I definitely want to delve into their past a little more and show a little more clearly why they are the way they are, these two barbarian characters. And not just them, I'd also like to delve into the past of some of the crew members a little bit, because it's something I left out of the first two books, and I think they deserve it. They're really rich characters, and I'd love to bring them up a little more and give them a little bit more to make them, to bring them to full clarity.
Okay, so if you want to hear those cool stories of what he might add, make sure you share this and get you and your friends to back this project, and he'll be good to go. You'll be able to get those answers. So what can you tell us about the universe itself? So you've mentioned a little bit about the aliens, the coal, you've mentioned the ship, the advanced crew, and the Starbarians. But what else is there about this universe that you could tell us? And many books, the successful ones anyway, the worlds where the story is told is as much a character as the antagonist and the protagonist. So what can we expect from this Starbarian saga?
Well, there is a whole galaxy of alien life out there in this series, and those different life forms are represented in some way in the crew of the Halcyon, the main ship, right, that Torque and Angar go to serve on, and to fight back against the Call. But I don't really take the reader to those life forms worlds in those first two books, though I will in the next book. So there will be a visit to the home world of at least one of those species in the third book, and it's going to play a pivotal role in the series. Everything's going to change from that point on. So far, I haven't really dipped into that a lot, but let's just say that there's an alliance of all these different species, and they're all very different, as you would expect. They're not all just humanoids with different nose appliances, as you see in different science fiction shows, which will remain nameless, or science fiction films. They're all very different, very unique to their own environments, and so anyway, I'm going to go into more detail on them in future books.
Okay, so Horde's Challenge is clearly part of the series. I know because it says so on the Kickstarter, which if you guys go check, you would know too. There are currently 2 books out that you've mentioned. You've mentioned there are 6 that you like to do. But what can we expect from these characters? How do you see the story ending? Is 6 it lock, stock, and barrel? It's 6 books, or could it potentially grow?
I don't know. I have a definite storyline, right? A definite through line from book 1 to book 6. There are certain things that I want to have happen by the time each book in the series is done, and each one is going to be more and more exciting, and it's going to build even more. If you can imagine that, when you read book 1, it's like nonstop action, especially the first third of it, and the third part of that book. And you might say, "Wow, how can you top that?" And my plan is to continue to top it in each book, and then to have this all leading up to a major confrontation in book 6 that will resolve at least part of the story, but not all of it. I'd like to leave some openings there to continue the series if I decide to, because the more I write this series, the more I love it. The more I love these characters. They're complicated and rich, and I want more. And I think your readers, your listeners, will feel the same when they've read them.
So we know that every literary universe, at least the good ones, have their own internally consistent rules of science, technology, and magic, or magic, I guess, depending on the genres. Sure. So what sort of tech and magic can we expect from these books?
Wow. Well, I would say that you can expect really Star Trek level, like sort of Star Trek The Next Generation level technology, except without transporters. We don't have matter transport going on here. So the characters are limited to being ship-bound and having ships transport them to the surfaces of planets and things like that. But then there are also some sort of portals that open up. So you have a little bit of sort of a Stargate kind of thing there. And then also there are biological enhancements that are made to some of the characters. I'm not going to mention them in particular, but it does change them and gives them certain abilities. So they're not really cyborgs, so to speak, but they have these enhanced abilities, and that would be, I guess in the realm of Star Trek level technology. So it's definitely not science fiction. It's definitely not science fantasy kind of stuff. It's all sort of believable in that it stems from current theories, current science theories, and things that could be possible in the future if we continue to extrapolate the possibilities based on where we're headed.
Okay. So of all the tech that you created or magic, if that applies, that you invented for your universe, what would you want for your daily use?
Oh, wow. Well, I'd like those biological enhancements, please. I'd like to have the abilities that some of these characters have to create great feats of strength and to survive exposure to the void, to the vacuum of space, and to leap tall buildings, to leap tall space stations in a single bound, that sort of thing.
Okay, and then how would you abuse that tech? Because I'm telling you, if I had a lightsaber, I'd be cutting all kinds of inappropriate things in half just because.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd go crazy with it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure just go on a spree just to max it out and just to feel my heart racing as I leap across the landscape and smash up mountaintops and just achieve things that I never thought I could do and just really savor that. And then, yeah, maybe look into space travel on a more regular basis. Hoping, of course, that people didn't decide that they were just sick of me and my stupid enhancements and just like, space me out an airlock, since I could survive, but I wouldn't necessarily have transportation home.
Well, you could survive being spaced, but eventually you'd starve.
Yeah. Well,
so that's not pleasant.
That wouldn't be fun.
So yeah, we've established that you have aliens in your book. You've mentioned that pretty clearly. So how do you go about creating these creatures? Do you let your nightmares inspire you? Do you look to nature? Do you make things up completely out of whole cloth?
All of the above. I like yourself. I have a wild imagination, and it takes me in unexpected directions all the time. And sometimes those will stem from the natural world and the patterns that arise from the natural world, or patterns of human technology. It's just any kind of influences, maybe things that I've seen in passing, or seen on vacation, or seen online, or thought of just in a dream. One thing I do, which I think I would urge your listeners who are creative types as well to do this if they have not already been doing it, and that is keep a pad and a pen by your bed when you sleep at night. And then when you wake up in the middle of the night, you have an incredibly crazy dream or vision, make sure you jot some kind of notes down right away as soon as you can while it's still fresh. That makes for great fuel as well when creating alien species or anything bizarre or cool.
Okay. Yeah. So clearly this interview is winding down, but before we wrap this up, was there anything about Horde's challenge in the Barbarian saga that we didn't ask that you want to tell us before we move on?
I think you have covered the ground really well. There's a lot to be told, a lot to be talked about with book 2, and I urge your listeners to check out the campaign on Kickstarter, and you can see a little bit more of the bones of that story, which are really cool. And we start off book 1, the two. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but book 1, the two characters are united and discovering their new universe and the power at their disposals. In book 2. We separate them and challenge them in really different ways. And it's makes for a great story. And then we'll see what happens from there.
Okay. So we've talked about in the beginning when we were getting to know you a little bit better that you've written in a lot of existing franchises and IPs. So of all of them, let's say that Barbarians is such a hit that everybody wants Rob, the writer, to work for them. And you could have your pick of any franchise that you've ever loved to write in that you haven't already. What would it be?
Oh man, that's any franchise that's currently licensing fiction, I would assume, or just any franchise that's super cool.
Any franchise that's super cool. We're just playing a guessing game, a wishing game, I guess.
Wow, I have a great deep love for Frank Herbert's Dune series.
Yeah,
and I know Kevin J. Anderson has that market pretty much cornered. He's doing all that. But that's a universe I'd love to write in. Or Asimov. Oh my God, I'd love to write in the Foundation series.
Oh yeah,
wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, they're doing the video series, right?
Yeah, but his writing style is dated enough. It's a little drier than modern readers.
Yeah,
I think I think audiobooks, because now the story's being read to them, has changed how you tell a good story. So for instance, and this is a little bit of a craft thing, but the word said, if you say, it used to be conventional wisdom is if you wrote that after speech, the reader glosses over it after a while, and you're literally just telling them who's speaking. But when someone's reading it to you and they say it 157 times, it starts to get really, really obvious. And so you start looking for other ways. And it's evolved the writing style, which it's not bad or good. It is. But so you would have to do a lot to modernize the style, I think. And then you'd get the purists that would be upset because how dare you? I don't know. That might be as dangerous as Warhammer
Ah,
for fans.
ah, it would be a dream come true, though. I would love it just to write in some of those characters, fill in some of the gaps
Yeah.
in that vast history that he created. Tell it in a modern way. You know, what the heck?
So
That would be so much fun.
I grew up reading the Rogue Squadron Star Wars books, and
Oh yeah.
I used to say I would love to write in Star Wars. I
Mhm.
think they've gotten so political, and like I try to stay apolitical on things. Like nobody's ever convinced by getting yelled at on the internet.
Yeah.
And so,
True.
like, we all have our opinions, and it's, if you look closely, we can tell what everyone's is. But as a general rule, I don't try to beat people in the face with it.
Yep.
And so I think the franchise lost its way.
Mm.
And so I don't know that I want to anymore. I liked Galaxy's Edge, but I've already gotten to write in that one.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Star Trek is a lot of fun. I think the later version, they got a little too utopian. Like I think they, in some of the series, like it was too idealistic understanding of human nature. I think I prefer a little grittier.
Yeah.
So it might be a hard one. I don't know. Stargate, that would be fun.
Yeah, it would.
And someone should give us a dang ending for what happened to Stargate Universe.
I know, right?
So they're like, oh, just check out the graphic novel. We wrap it up there. And then I read the graphic novel. And yeah, no, it's a cliffhanger there too, the jerks.
Do you think that's going to come back to life now that Amazon bought MGM?
They've been trying to get Stargate to revitalize itself several times. The problem is the people that own the IP don't want to let anything happen to it. Some of the actors for like Stargate Atlantis tried to continue the show. They crowdfunded. They had people committing to back, but they wouldn't release the IP. I think enough time has passed that all of the primary characters are older, and so like that's the one thing about a military organization, you can age out of the positions. So eventually you're too old to be on a ground team. So I think, like for instance, in Stargate Universe, they had the guy that was Colonel O'Neill, Richard Dean Anderson, I think, was that his name?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So he was a general and had cameos because that fit with his age. And that's not a dig. I mean, that's just, combat's a young man's game.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think you'd almost have to pick up the story X number of time into the future, so you could have the same characters come back and just fill in the gaps. But yeah, I'd like to see more from Stargate. And if not me, somebody please, I'm begging you.
Oh yeah, and we're writers. We make stuff up. I mean, and the imagination is boundless, and the universe is endless. You can always come up with something cool and a cool new way to bring things back around and do something fresh with something that you love.
Yeah. So that would be, for me, I guess it'd be Stargate, or if I could go back to like the 90s Star Wars.
Yeah.
It'd definitely be Star Wars, because I love me some Rogue Squadron.
Yep.
And I remember the first time I broke my arm wrestling, and I was a kid, and I'm sitting in the waiting room at the hospital reading a Star Wars, and they're like, oh, we just got in the Bacta tank, and it healed us in an hour. I'm like, I want this in my life. So,
I wish, speaking of properties, I wish they'd bring back, I know that's not the subject of this show, but Firefly, I mean, come on. And I know it was perfect, like why tamper with perfection, but I'd love to see that come back. And Farscape. I would love to see Farscape brought back too.
Yeah, the Andromeda as well was really, really good. The guy that did was it Xena Warrior Princess spawned off of it. Hercules, that series that was on the TV in the 90s.
Kevin Sorbo.
Yeah, Kevin Sorbo did Andromeda. That was amazing.
Yep.
And I just could only imagine what they could do with the modern, like, digital technology. You merge that with actual good character acting, and oh my goodness, the amazing things could happen.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, we've wandered far afield.
I love it.
We try to keep this right at an hour because people have short attention spans. So before we, as we bring this to a close, Robert, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, dear listener, it'll be in the show notes. So scroll down.
Yeah. Thanks, JR. Your listeners can just search me out online, Google me. I'm all over the place. And you can also look at my website, which is at bobscribe.com, bobscribe.com. And you can look me up on Wikipedia, and you can look up the Kickstarter by searching for Barbarian Saga on the Kickstarter.com site.
All right. And you can find us, dear listener, on our website at anchor.fm/blasters and tech blades, anchor.fm/blasters and blades. We're on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. That's again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. So far, we've only received one letter, and it was to complain about my dog barking and tell me how unprofessional that was. But for the rest of you, if you want to send letters, it's there, we promise. And we even respond. The Blasters and Blades Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. You can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month and as much as $10 over at anchor.fm/blasters and blades, or for a one-time fee over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it provides for you that it's for the podcast. I will make sure I keep my intrepid co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. And so that's how you can support the show. Or share it with a friend. That always helps. Link, follow, subscribe, do all the things. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I'm J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.